Welcome to the Grit.org podcast with Colby Harris and Brian Harbin. In these episodes, they speak to top achievers in athletics and business to understand the habits and mindset they apply in order to build more grit.
I can! I will! I'm going to!
Welcome back to the Grit.org podcast. My name's Colby Harris. Alongside me is Brian Harbin, and we're here with today's guest, Nathan Bourne. Nathan, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, fun fact, Nathan kicked my butt about 2 weeks ago at a venture capital pitch competition. I said the least he could do is come on the podcast, talk about his growth from being a collegiate wrestler to serial entrepreneur and family man. So we're super excited to have him here, diving into his full story of growth and grit. So take us back to the beginning, Nathan. You actually grew up one of 9. Tell us a little bit about that and what life with 8 siblings is like.
For sure, I will. Before I do, you rocked the pitch, by the way, and I was like, I think I'll win. But I love what you said to me when we first met. You were like, I prepared for this all day, and I planned on winning. And then when I saw you go, I thought, all right, if I'm going to lose, it better be to that guy. So
that was the mentality.
Yeah,
well, it was funny, too, because we got to meet right before we went on, and even before you did the pitch, I went over to the filmer that was with us, and I said, hey, that guy over there in the jean jacket, if we're going to lose, it's going to be to him, and I'm totally okay with it.
That's awesome, man. Well, it was a cool experience, and here we are. So
yeah, I can never get too many reps. They even said at the end, they were like, hey, this is the practice for the big pitch that's going to come one day.
Right, and that's why I wanted to do it, too. I thought it was a cool way to kind of rip off the Band-Aid. I'll talk more about my company, MyCore, and how we bootstrapped it and really kind of avoided that whole gauntlet of raising capital. Mm-hmm. But to answer your question about family, I'm the 4th of 9 children. So it's kind of wild. My parents, my mom just turned 60 last week. My dad will be 61 Friday, actually. And they have 9 children. My oldest brother is 41. My youngest brother is 20. There are 21 grandkids. So, yeah, it's pretty wild. And my parents got married at 18 and 19. And I've been an entrepreneur since 2006, which is the year that I graduated high school. So it was that summer. And I would get asked, what's your background, right? People want to know that, when you start a business. I'm like, childhood, poverty, figuring it out, survival. So, yeah, my parents got married very young, and they chose kind of a alternative way of living, I guess you could say. They kind of lived off the grid, and they were in ministry, and they just sort of made it work. So we grew up, we'd go feed the homeless, and then we also ate, the food that was being served. So it was always a little ambiguous to who was really getting the help. But that instilled in me, I think, an understanding of the way of the world below a certain line,
Yeah.
and empathy, if you will.
Right. And I mean, having a big family too, we actually come from a family of about, I think it's up to 45 now, and our grandparents got married. We're cousins, actually.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize
that.
That's awesome.
And our grandparents got married at 19 and 16, I think, or even, somewhere around there. So huge line down, and same way they always were givers, and having that support system too, though, it makes it all possible for sure.
So tell us about some of your early aspirations, passions. Obviously you got into sports at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. So, being 6 boys and 3 girls, my father is kind of just an alpha human being. He actually, he played soccer at the University of Connecticut, was recruited to the #1 school in the country, Division I, and left after a month, married my mom, and had 9 kids. So athletics were a major part of our lives. Socially, it also gave us this sort of social capital, if you will. We didn't have the financial resources, but on the field, your parents' bank account don't really matter, right? On the court, on the mat, and it was a space to, I guess you could say, express ourselves and win, and so growing up, like, we all played sports. We played every sport. We swam, we played football, we played soccer. We were constantly in sports. And it was at first just something that was expected because we were capable of it, as kind of just being, bruisers, if you will, and having some kind of natural faculties. But it was probably my freshman year in high school when I realized, this could be a meal ticket. This could be something that really helps me transcend out of poverty, really. And when you're a kid and you're growing up the way you grow up, you don't really know you're that way until you put it together. And you're like, oh, my friends are getting cars and our electricity shut off. So you start to put it together, and then I realized, all right, academics and athletics and the combination thereof, I'm going to lean fully into that. And I just got really decisive, really clear about that at a relatively young age.
I have a little follow-up question. I did 1 year of wrestling and 119, and there's a movie Vision Quest, which was a great motivator.
It's a great one.
But one of the things I wanted to ask you that's interesting, I love what you said too about on the field, your parents' bank account doesn't matter. But when you made that decision that you saw it as a meal ticket, how did you turn that into, because I think a lot of kids could feel that as pressure.
Right.
But you obviously turned it into more of a passion. So any advice you'd have for a kid in that situation that sees a sport and academics as a great opportunity without putting that additional pressure on themselves?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that kind of back to the original thought there, it is an equalizer. And I think that oftentimes inequality can be categorized in obvious ways, like race or socioeconomics. But there's other ways that I think a young person can feel inadequate or, unequal. But putting in time and energy and devotion and dedication, it does what time does. It promotes or exposes you, right? So I think it was a space to occupy that I knew any of the maybe disadvantages that life afforded us or didn't, I could make the difference, right? Like I can jump, I can run, I could do push-ups. And there were like tangible things like, maybe I didn't get to go to that special camp that the, rich kids got to go to, or maybe they didn't get a personal trainer. I can promise you I didn't have the best equipment, and the newest cleats. But that made me more tenacious, that made me more like, I want to kick these rich kids' butts, So I think in a way you have to have a mind space, that 6 inches between your ears is everything. And it drove me. It put a chip on my shoulder. Like I wanted to win, not because of the challenges, but in spite of them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think, too, because we talk a lot about pressure with athletes. I mean, all these Olympians, world champions that have been in the seat you're in now, they talk about the identity issues after they've done it. And while you were just saying that, I thought for a second, as someone in your situation, right, pressure does make diamonds. Pressure is the only way to make diamonds. And it's crazy that it comes with that, but just as much, I loved the book, Trevor Moawad, It Takes What It Takes. And I feel like that's the thing. It's like if that pressure is there and you know what you need to do, putting your head down, especially in that sort of situation where it's like you see that as your avenue out, this is my only avenue out and I got to go for it. That's the pressure that you get. A lot of kids don't have that pressure, even if they do make it to the world stage, but they were put through private schools, had the best trainers. The pressure is what makes the greats so great. And I think you clearly applied that also to your education. So we've been talking a lot about sports and your passions and things like that, but you were recruited by all Ivy League schools, Stanford, Penn State, Yale. Correct me if I'm saying any wrong ones.
Yeah. So I was...
Tell us a little bit about,
I can
making it that. Yeah. I mean, either way, just tell us about balancing that, if there is such thing, and how you made it through college to then be such a highly touted recruit, or through high school.
Yeah, for sure. So the kind of story behind the story, we were homeschooled for the majority of our lives. And with 9 children and limited resources, we were like no-schooled, not really homeschooled. So we learned, we call it the school of hard knocks, right? So we were in, what did my dad call it? He would call it will survival or boy will survive school or whatever, right? So we just sort of were in a gritty environment, like a tough environment, whether it was from hunting or working on, vehicles, and it was just a lot more hands-on. And that's in my blood, but you could probably tell by my jean jacket and hair product.
The full denim outfit.
Yeah, right. But I'm not really doing that anymore, right? So let me try to frame this properly. Like, at a relatively early age, I knew that manual labor was not for me, right? Like, I was like, I don't want to do that. Like, I can see how limited it is. So I think in a way that athletics and the grit and work ethic that became a badge of honor for my father and for my older brothers, I wasn't going to be the soft one, right? I wasn't going to be the weak one. So I wanted to apply it to mindset, right? Apply it to academics, apply it to more intangible things that still require quite a bit of strain, quite a bit of effort. But I wanted to go about it differently. So fun fact, the first time I saw the inside of a school was in 7th grade, my first day in school when they put us into school. So here I am in 7th grade, and I loved it. I was like, this place is awesome, man. And, we get free food, free lunches, free breakfast.
Know everyone everywhere.
Yeah, I'm like, this place is awesome, man. It's warm when it's cold out. It's cold when it's warm out. And I think where maybe most kids were like, school, I don't want to go to school. I'm like, I can't wait to go to school. I love this place. So I just leaned into it. And I don't want to be too dramatic, but I'll just say that my writing and reading was not even at 7th grade. I mean, I could probably barely read and write, frankly. And what's interesting, too, and I think the larger theme here, is that you can become whoever you want to become. And I think what the journey's really about is unbecoming. I read in your creed that first sentence about becoming. And it's true. I think it's half and half. So there are things that just make you who you are, right? That God made you that way. It's your nature. It's your nurture. It's probably about half of the deal that you just default to. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to invent the other half. You're going to have to create. You're going to have to will into existence the other half. Like, it's no wonder that Michael Jordan could jump, and dribble and shoot, but only probably about half as well as he could. The other half he built, right? So it's this interesting convergence, I think, like this cross-section between natural faculties, God-given gifts, and work ethic, you know what I mean, and just building it. So I say that to say I had affirmed myself so much that I am intelligent and that I am, successful, and I don't mean like getting up in front of the mirror and like chanting it, just like I was living it out. I was walking it out, and I had a bit of a compound effect from 7th grade, to senior in high school and beyond, that I forgot that I wasn't educated prior to that. And a family friend who I used to write, we were pen pals. She had moved to Florida, actually. Her mother came across all these letters and was like, hey, I found these letters from when you guys were writing to each other. And she gives them to me, and I'm like, wow, that's crazy. And I start reading them. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, my kindergartner could have written these letters. I look at the date.
Is that English?
I'm like, I look at the date, yeah, and the spelling and the word structure and the, just all of it. It looked like I literally my daughter who's in 1st grade could have written these letters, and I was in what would have been 5th or 6th grade, right? And it was like it had to have been repressed memories or something, It like all came back at once, like, oh shoot, I really did not have a formal education. I really wasn't educated. But you can learn and you can compress time frames, right? So I went into 7th grade in middle school and I just leaned into it. And 6 years later, I mean, I have it at home somewhere. It's not like, on the fridge or anything, don't worry. But I have the handwritten letter from the coach at Harvard recruiting me. Penn, Stanford, Princeton, like top tier academic schools. And I was president of National Honor Society. I was homecoming king, and all this is like glory day stuff. But the point of the story is that in 6 years, in juvenile years too, this isn't like from 30 to 36, I changed my life. From like 12 to 18, I set out on a path, and I just started believing that I was those things, and I've become that person. I am well-read. I am educated. I have worked on those things. I mean, I'm still white trash too. Don't get it twisted, right? But I've had to wrestle, no pun intended, with the tension between both of those things. And I can speak more to that. I mean, it's a lot of therapy.
Well, I think too, a lot of issues being resolved across the couch and whatnot. I think one thing that I saw recently was people always talk about find role models, find people you respect, learn from them. But the unbecoming is so much less presented to people of find something about yourself or find something in someone else that you don't like,
right,
and put it down that that's not what you'll be like. So just as much as you're being aware of what you do like, you got to be aware of the things you don't like. And just as much as you're trying to become this new person, you also have to leave some old things and recognize the things you don't want to become.
Absolutely. Yeah, because that's where the boundaries are. And I think we live in a world today where everything is permissible. And there's sort of this virtue or virtue signaling, you might call it, that comes with being open and saying yes to everything. I think you and I talked about this when we got lunch. But
hardest part of being an entrepreneur, that's what you were saying.
Right, saying no. Right, so one of our core values, so my primary business, MyCore, is the name of the company, MyCore. And we have 3 core values. The first one is walk by faith. Second is lead with who. And the third is measure what matters. And you might recall when I did the pitch, I just started with that, right? I led with that. I said, hey, I'm going to just first share with you who we are and why we exist and spend some time there, and then we'll get into what we do. So the second one, lead with who, there's a longer version of it, but verbally, just to share it shortly, I wanted to find a way to articulate like the way I lived, right? The way I roll, just kind of my way, if you will. And there's a lot of application to this, but simply put, I consider who I am and who my who's are, and whose I am at all times. That's just sort of the lens that I put everything through. And I do that before I think about why I'm doing something, right? And I think there's a lot of doctrine even. There's a lot of movement around this notion that you should have a reason to do something. You should have a why, a purpose. And it's founded, right? I mean, you can look at the Bible in Jeremiah 29:11. It talks about purpose. But I think purpose has to be anchored by identity, because if a person doesn't believe in their core, right? My core, no pun intended, right? That this is who I am and I'm meant to be this person. You won't harness enough energy. You won't find, because like, I think about the hours in, I'm not an Olympic athlete. I was a Division I wrestler and I made it to a decent school and I barely even had a college career because I chose entrepreneurship. That's the second part of the story, right? But, all imposter syndrome aside, not everyone makes it to become a Division I athlete, even if it's fencing, let alone wrestling. So I'm proud of that. But I think about, like, I would get up in the morning and put trash bags on and run a mile or two before the bus came. At 5 a.m, I'm like 15 years old, with trash bags on in the freezing cold, cutting weight. And like Vision Quest, right? That's a perfect example of major weight loss. with the sport of wrestling. And frankly, I didn't even cut that much weight. I had to cut, but not, 10 pounds, not that bad. But the reason I did it is because I knew there's no freaking way that the guy that I'm wrestling tonight or this weekend is doing this right now. Like, this sucks. This is awful, right? So I guess I could say I invested early on into who I am. And I built an identity around that. I built like a real belief system. And I have to check that, right? Like, because that can get into ego, that can get into arrogance, that can get into, overly being confident. But when you're around other talented people, like the two of you, right? It doesn't create that friction. It actually does the opposite. It's giving permission to one another to step into who you are and going, man, there really is only one Colby. There really is only one Brian. There really is only one Nathan. And I think if people can get in touch with that, then they'll feel obligated to build things that matter, right? Because it's like, shoot, I'm the only dude with this fingerprint. Like I'm the only guy, and I have to wake up every day and be Nathan Bourne. So back to kind of the original thought that you and I were embarking on there, I'm finding in real time that it's the things I've said no to that most inform who I am, not the things I've been open to or said yes to. And there's a season, like we were talking about this, you remind me a lot of me now that I'm an old man at 34, but you're 20.
Entrepreneurship kills you.
Right, yeah, you can say.
Yeah, I'm 20.
I look 44, but that's just entrepreneur.
I got 26 yesterday, so I think I'm back in some years off.
Well, it's the way you carry yourself, right? Like, yeah, I get these weird compliments these days. Like, you look like Hulk from, the guy. I Google, I'm like, dude's 54. I'm like, you're killing me, man. Like, come on, give me like a cool Gen Z.
I hate to say it, but I see it. I hate to say it, but I see it.
What's his name? Whatever his name is, yeah.
Hey, Nathan, so let me ask you this, and we definitely want to get more into MyCore and that, but I'm curious. So that's a big change going from where you were in 7th grade, walking in your first school to, let's go back to UPenn.
Right.
You're a college wrestler. I mean, that's a totally different world compared to what you've grown up in. So I'm really curious as far as what were some of your takeaways from that experience, because obviously it helped shape part of your own personal core. Right,
yeah. So I mentioned it earlier, but talk about imposter syndrome, right? Like, it's the classic big fish, small pond, right? So I did what I did in those 6 years, and I sort of became the big man on campus, right? And I got comfortable with that and was like, okay, like I'm occupying this space. I'm doing the things that I'm doing, on a state level, on a national level with the sport of wrestling and academics and these things. And I can remember a couple things too, which is cool. So to answer your question, like as a freshman in high school, I didn't even know what this meant. And I didn't have parents that were grooming me to go to these schools or anything. I just remember saying, I want to go to an Ivy League school, which I didn't even really know what that meant. Like I didn't know it was these specific 8 schools. And I want to wrestle at the #1 school in the country for wrestling and academics. Like that was my goal, right? And I sort of just put it out there to God and to myself. And so when I came upon my senior year of high school, I remember getting recruited and thinking like I could go wrestle at a school where I would be the man, and be like a top recruit. Or I could even go wrestle Division 2 or wrestle Division 3. That was obviously an option. Or I could go back down to the totem pole, right? Back down to the bottom of the rung. And I remember thinking like, Nathan, do you want to be a big fish in a small pond, or do you want to be a small fish in a big pond? And I thought, I want to be a big fish in a big pond, right? Like, how do I get there? It's like, well, you got to get to the
Where's
pond.
Where's that in the options?
Right. And I think a lot of people, they don't consider the pond, like they're thinking more of the fish, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, all right, I got to go to the big pond and I got to build, I got to learn, I got to develop. So to answer your question, Brian, I get there and I'm like, how did I get into this school? Like, I think I might have gone to admissions, but I think you're the wrong guy, And
this somehow, Nathan Bourne, do I look like the same
right.
Nathan Bourne?
And look, it's no question. I mean, wrestling was like the meal ticket in, right? But obviously I had to have a certain level of academics. But yeah, it was interesting too, because the way that people measure things, like at an Ivy League school like that, athletics are almost like demonized, like you were treated like, oh, you got in because you're one of the athletes. So the athletes really spent a lot of time together. I mean, we had to go to study hall, and we'd be in the kind of same like physical circles around the gym and, so forth. But I struggled a lot with believing that I deserved to be there. And I had a lot of challenges back home. There were things that were maybe not a thought process for the average student. But, for example, you got to buy extra long sheets for your dorm, and you got to pay for those things, right? So I get a full ride. I mean, I'm getting scholarships and all kinds of financial aid. I took a student loan out so that I could buy basic things like a laptop and a winter jacket and like shower supplies. And I started a business with $10,000 of that student loan from my dorm room my freshman
Classic.
year. Yep.
Embezzle the college money.
Loan. I still pay the student loan to this day. Yep. So it was a really cool experience, because I had to like really stretch my identity, really stretch, like, do I deserve to be here compared to the people that, went to the prep schools and that competed heavily to get here. And at first I struggled with that, and then I eventually reconciled with it and was like, of course I deserve to be here, right? Like, I've done the work. And I think that that's the ultimate differentiator. Like, and it comes down sometimes like in the buzzer beater, it comes down in overtime. It's like these little final moments. And in that moment, it's only a few moments, a few seconds, a quarter, whatever the time frame is, in soccer, the extra minutes. But that's a compound effect of hours and hours, 10,000 hours minimum of working on your mindset and your skill set so that you can capitalize and cash in. In other words, you can withdraw if you've made all the deposits up to that point. So, yeah. So I had to remind myself all the work I did to get there.
Yeah. And my new favorite thing that I've been preaching, and I've got a session lined up in my old high school, and the big thing I want to preach is outwork your self-doubt. Like, that was, when I saw it the other day, I was just like, damn. Like, that is preaching right there. Like, outwork your self-doubt. Like, if you feel like you're not confident and you can't do this, blah, blah, go do the work, and you're gonna feel that over time when you're paying those deposits. So real quick, before we move on, talking a little bit more about MyCore and essentially your decision to leave UPenn, I do want to ask, these days, the generation that I'm a part of mainly, especially, and it's only growing over time, like, a lot of people have that victim mentality, always want to play the victim. And that was big for me. Like, when I just took my story and was like, man, forget about it. Everyone's got problems. I can grow from it. I can learn from it. But what would you say to someone my age or younger that, feels like the world is against them right now? Like, what advice would you have to someone that is experiencing that victim mentality?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't mean to have like a stock answer for everything, but it sort of has become my universal philosophy. And it goes back to this lead with who principle, because when you face adversity and then some more adversity and then some more on top of that, as they say, when it rains, it pours, right? So we've all been in a situation where, like, for real, like,
there's a full hurricane on the way.
Like, man, like, this is like a hurricane within a tropical storm within a tornado. The way that I've always been able to navigate that, right? And I think that's important too, because it's not really about overcoming it. It's about navigating it. You don't overcome a wave, you ride that wave. So I had this just core belief. There's this overarching narrative in my mind, which was like, man, God must be preparing me for something significant, because the amount of pressure and adversity, it doesn't make any damn sense. And that's actually been an overarching theme for my life. Like, I don't know. I thought of this once, and it may or may not resonate. But have you ever shot a bow and arrow, like just archery, you know, hunted? Mm-hmm. So if you think of just like a bow and an arrow as objects, in and of themselves, they are of no threat, right? The only way that they have a use and the only way that they become lethal is if you pull back the bow, right? So you knock the arrow, you pull back the bow. And then now we're talking, right? We can kill, we can, you know, traject, we can cover distance. And I think people aren't willing enough to pull back on the things in their life, right? Like if they can go back into their childhood, if they can go back into their past, if they can go back into their relationships, their failures, their mishaps, and their wins. It's not just the negative, it's like the good stuff. Like when were you killing it, you know, and what mind space were you in? And I think a lot of times it's like, don't live in the past, or let the past be. It's like the past is informing everything, right? So there's like two components to this, I think. One is pulling back, and then the other is, when do you let go? Because if you pull back a bow and arrow and you just let go, it's going to go a certain length, it's going to hit a certain trajectory. But if you have enough patience to really get the arc of that arrow and then maybe even give it a little more pull, you're spring loading that thing, right? I mean, there's really no, it's not even close, you know, like it's like, wow, this hit that target 30 yards away and this one is like 200 yards away, right? So as sort of a metaphor, every time something negative happened or I had adversity or went through struggle, I'm like, I haven't let go yet. You know, I'm calibrating, I'm spring loading, I'm working on myself, I'm building something. And I think in this day and age, particularly for young people where social media is ever enticing, and I don't mean like wasting your time on it, I mean like putting yourself on it so that you can get short-term gratification of likes and shares. It puts you on the grid in a way that frankly isn't healthy. Like you have to be off the grid. So for years, I went from being big man on campus, top of the heap, you know, getting recruited for like, you know, juvenile stuff. I'm 17, 18, but I was like the man. And then I entered entrepreneurship and I was a nobody, broke as a joke, Ivy League dropout, like trying to figure it out for years. I mean, literally until like 2 years ago, I really broke through. And I think about that and I stayed off social media. I mean, I consumed it, but I wasn't like producing, and I wasn't like, hey, I know what I'm talking. I had some good stuff I could have offered, but I really wanted to cultivate my skills and get my mind right and know who I am and know who I'm not. And I'm so thankful I did that, because as I sort of embark on this next chapter and things are coming, I'm like, I can discern so quickly. I'm like, nope, not doing it. Yes, I'll do that podcast. No chance in hell. Not even close. You're cool. F you, you're cool. You know, and it makes all the difference, because I can navigate, right? I can navigate it all, you know, be polite in the process, but avoid certain people, certain circles. So I don't know if I even answered your question, frankly, but you got me off on a tangent there. So hopefully you're picking up what I'm putting down.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah, Brian, I don't know. Did I lose you guys?
Yeah,
no, keep going. You're spitting game.
And Nathan, I definitely agree with going back, you know, with our grit universities, the first thing they do when they come to work with us is we go through a deep dive, the wisdom of the Enneagram and their personality, just really helping understand the lens through which they see the world. And I totally agree in terms of just really go back to your past to understand, because you can't really change it, but a big part of it is understanding it and then kind of reframing how you look at it. So what was perceived as a negative or something that held you back is actually something that is going to give you an advantage moving forward. And I think, you know, being able to do that as things arise, because I think a lot of times fast forward 30, 40 years and people have way more stuff to go through versus the sooner you can do it, the better. And It sounds like too, so you were at college at UPenn, you know, I think hit a wall, because I think you alluded to the fact that you ended up dropping out. Yeah. So tell us about, you know, I know you took the loan to start the business. So tell us about that decision to leave UPenn, drop wrestling, and start off on your own.
And by the way, you got to realize too, I mean, even though it wasn't that long ago, this was 2010 when I left. Leaving any college at that time, but particularly an Ivy League school was like, people were like, are you okay? Like, have you lost your mind? Like this entrepreneurial culture that a Gen Zer is in that has sort of devalued the college experience. That hadn't kicked in yet. That was still a few years away, right? So it was pretty radical to leave Penn and stop wrestling and do all that. But I didn't have the language for it, but it was like it wasn't feeding who I am. And I couldn't muster it up anymore. Like I couldn't conjure up the energy. And when the stakes were low, middle school, high school, and I was on a linear path, it was like a sprint. Like I could just do it. I just sprinted it for 6 years, and I sort of broke through and had some great successes as an athlete and a student and socially. But then as you get to higher education and you start adulting a little bit, it's what I was mentioning earlier. You better be sourcing from a place that's really sustainable, that's really like in your identity. And to be specific, I think I had sort of rebelled against my parents in this sort of odd way where I was like, well, you guys can live that way, but I'm going to go to school, and you guys can struggle on bills. I'm going to be rich, so it was like, I kind of call it like a black sheep, but I was like a white sheep, if that makes sense. And not, I love my parents live the way they live, and they're amazing people, and it's just different, it's not better or worse. But so I wasn't living true to myself in the nature of who I was, right? So I was like, I'm not this Ivy Leaguer, this is not, I just couldn't tolerate the people I was around. Like, frankly, I was like, these people suck, man. Yeah. Like they were too soft in a way, and I don't mean to be judgmental, but like their priorities and things that they stressed. And I was just like, do you have any idea what it's like to not have food? Like their basic needs on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs had been met. And I'm sure this wasn't true for everyone, right? Because you can't judge. But the great majority of people, their stressors were very much based on hierarchy, right? Like, I'm the best, and I made it to this school, and I'm going to get, the best jobs. It was cutthroat to the point where, like, we would be graded on a curve. Oh, I'll never forget this. So I was out, I think I had my wisdom teeth out, and I met this cool girl, and she's like, giving me notes, and I had a wrestling tournament, and like I was like, do you mind if I get the notes? We have the test coming up. And she was like, yeah, I'll get them for you. And then like she didn't get them to me, and I was like, hey, we got that like midterm coming up. She finally sends me a message, says, I'm sorry, I can't give you the notes, And I'm like, oh, like, did your dog eat them? Like, well, why not? Like, I can meet you somewhere, email them, scan them. And she's like, it'll affect the curve. And I'm like, what?
Wow.
Yeah. So, getting graded on a curve is a positive thing, except when you're around geniuses, because then I remember getting a grade and I got like a 85 on it, and it was a C because everybody else had gotten like 100 on it, right? So it actually took you down versus as up. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, like, what a way to live. So I didn't like competitiveness in that nature, because if you look at the real definition of being competitive, it's a lacking mindset. It's a scarcity mindset. It's a win-lose, right? And that's fine in a wrestling match. You're going to lose. I'm going to win. I'm going to win. I'm going to lose. But in business, you have to have an abundant mindset, right? You have to create win-wins. You have to create ecosystems. You have to create strategic alliances. And I was way more inspired by that, because I grew up, it was low level, but that's how we survived. It was like, oh, you need some food? Well, we or like, I'll give you a classic example. So my parents would rent a home, and then they'd eventually get behind. And of course, the homes weren't very nice. They needed to work, and we were all capable of working. So it was just like a matter of time for like fixing up this house, because the landlord was like, well, I'm not getting rent, so I might as well fix the roof and do it. So we'd be like doing manual labor on the house, right? So at an early age, I learned what collaboration looked like at like a survival level. And I just thought, well, I could probably make that a little more sophisticated, and I've literally built MyCore that way, where it's this ecosystem of all ships rising with the tide. So it took me a while to be okay with that part of me, because I looked the part, I used to be a stud like you, Colby, all right? There was a day. You wait, you'll look like this one day, all right? And I had the hair and the hole in the jaw that looks like you could get punched and nothing would happen, But I rejected that, and I needed to for a season. Like, I needed to be like, I'm not that person. And then I just was like, I'm this Ivy League successful person. But then I hit a wall, and I was like, I got to get back to my roots. So now, today at 34, I have it all figured out. Right. But I've learned to, no pun intended, have this Bourne identity, right? And I have these 2 passports, one to the trailer park and one to the country club. And I know how to speak and look and exist in one and in the other. And I've had to create the combination of those things. And I think for everyone, really, but particularly for young people, there's probably parts of them that they're denying. And, it's hard when you're talking to them at a young age, but what you guys are doing to instill and to give permission and to cultivate these identities, just from this creed alone, that's invaluable. That's amazing. A lot of this I learned because I had to. So when one student might be thinking, like, I'm going to be in the fight of my tournament, I was in the fight of my life. So I stepped on the mat like, I have to win to get out. And they were like, I'd like to win this tournament. So it was just a different mindset.
And I love what you say, too, about the collaboration and the competition mindset, because that's what I've realized since we've started doing this. It's like, hey, if it's good for Brian, it's good for me. If it's good for me, it's good for grit.org. If it's good for you to win the pitch competition, I'm not going to go be a bum about it and be like, oh, like, F this guy, man. I'm not going to go shake his hand. Nothing like, dude, crushed it, dap you up, like, get to talking, find out you're a wrestler. And then it's like, hey, please come on the podcast. We grab lunch, good little break in the midday, good conversation. Those sort of things are so valuable to me, and that's how all this transpired, right? It's like we are in a competition, but there were no sore losers. I think it's that same mentality of like, you can only do what you can do. Me losing to you in a competition is, I have the choice to move from that or learn from it or sit down on a podcast with you, right? So I think that's really valuable. I know we're kind of moving on time. We're really crushing right now. I'm loving it. So we've brought it up a few times. You've been in a few businesses from the get-go, but let's go ahead and start with MyCore. Tell us about what you've done and some of the growth you've seen these last few years as you've just been breaking down walls.
For sure. And before I got off on the tangent within the tangent that was tangenting, Brian asked me about the company I started in college, and it was a clothing company. So the summer of 2006, I think it was the first time that I was free, like I was outside of the structure of high school, and I allowed some creative energy to flow. And I guess you could say I got stung, at that point. Like there was no turning back because I started to change my thinking. So I had this really cool company, and it was a blast. My best friend and I started it, and we just sort of kept that going, and it started to occupy space where like I couldn't pay attention in class, and I would like be like going into wrestling being like, oh, man, we got to get those orders fulfilled, and we got to mail things off. It's funny because I became Facebook friends with a lot of people through that, and now I'm years later, they have kids, life's going on. I'm like, how do I know that person? I'm like, I mailed them a shirt, like to their dorm room. Like I remember. So that was kind of like step one. And then in 2009, I got introduced to a company that's now a partner of mine called Legal Shield. And that was an awesome season because from 2009 to 2016, I worked full-time with that company. And I was working with that company while I was at Penn. I made $35,000 my first 4 months with the company. And my parents like barely made that much money combined, right? So I was like, I'm rich. Like I was walking tall. I'm 5'11", but I was 6 foot that day. So I thought like, this isn't practical. Like I'm hating school. I love the overall experience, but I'm 3.5 years into it. And I thought, I need to just make money. I can always come back and get my degree. So I was like, I'm going to go on a break. I'm still on that break. So I left Penn, and I got such a great education with that company because I got to be around entrepreneurs and leaders, and I embarked on personal development. And it was like the first time I learned personal development outside of the school of hard knocks, you know? So I was like, oh, this isn't just like life kicking me in the teeth and then me learning to overcome it, you know what I mean? Or to persevere. I'm like reading, you know, How to Win Friends and Influence People and Think and Grow Rich and the Compound Effect. And it became this really cool need for my intellectual journey that I could meet through personal development. And I also was, you know, making a living and kind of paying the bills and doing okay for myself. And then in 2016, at 27 years old, I had this idea to put it all in one place. And that has been a 7-year journey, building it brick by brick. So today, my primary business, MyCore, our mission is to be the world's most employee-centric company. So it's through this lens of the employee experience. And we provide to local businesses and nonprofits. We like to say that MyCore is made for Main Street, an all-in-one subscription for bookkeeping, payroll, benefits, and HR. So that's been my journey with entrepreneurship. But we bootstrapped the whole thing. And that's been a unique experience too, doing it from scratch.
I'm curious. So tell us where the idea originated. You said it was an idea that you wanted to start. And then also, I mean, I think I'm familiar with similar companies like Gusto, Paychex, similar companies. So explain, I guess, too, how it works with you guys.
Yeah, I'll give you kind of the quick version of how it came together. So with the company Legal Shield, I really was on the like recruitment side and the leadership side, but I had people in my organization that would offer the services as an employee benefit. So I would go into these enrollments, right, and I would see a company with 20 employees, and there would be a vendor from all these different verticals, right? So you'd have like a health insurance broker, an AFLAC agent, you'd have a financial advisor, you'd have a Legal Shield rep. And it was a feeding frenzy. I'm like, this is awful. They're all trying to kind of oversell each other, and you're being polite, but you're like, screw the AFLAC guy, come over here, and like, don't talk to them. And I'm thinking, this is like a really unsavory, inefficient way to do this. What if you could have it all in one place and you had it in tech so that the data was collected one time and all these people worked together collaboratively, right back to what I was mentioning. And now it was really about advising the employees and empowering them and equipping them, shielding them up, as we say, versus selling them a product so that you could get a commission or get sent on the next company trip. So that was like the light bulb moment, right? And we built that, and it went really, really well. And then I realized, wait, this fundamental problem spans beyond employee benefits. There's an issue with payroll and the way that payroll and benefits belong together, and HR and bookkeeping. And real time, we're building the accounting solution. So we're realizing like this thing spider webs, this thing just keeps going. But it's all based on a sort of a core philosophy. We talked about this, and it was kind of my pitch, if you will, during that competition. There's been this obsession the last 10 years with SaaS, right? Software as a service. And like anything, when it's novel and it first comes out, everyone's jazzed, and it has its curb appeal. But human beings, we're unique units. We get over stuff fast. And nowadays we get over even faster. So like ChatGPT, I'll give it like 2 more weeks and we'll be over it. We'll just be like, oh, cool, yeah, whatever. It doesn't mean it won't change the world. It doesn't mean it's not radically,
it's only
evolving.
But
it's only exciting for like a week, right? And this is a slippery slope because the time that used to transcend for us to change a style, information's so centralized now, and it's right in the palm of our hand that we get over it very, very quickly, right? So I thought, well, I want to build something that's timeless. I want to build something that's universal. I want to build something that never ages. And what I've found is that the complication around human beings, human beinging, right? Like just peopling is like, you better lead with who in everything you do, because that's where all the problems are, right? That's where all the opportunity is. That's where the void is, so to speak. So I realized, okay, there's a million of these software companies and they're all DIY. because it's pretty basic. If they beef up their service, they're going to have to pay for it, and then the price of their attractive platform is going to go up, and then you're now into that consultative space. So I thought, what if we looked at SaaS differently and we flipped it on its head, and instead of software as a service, we were service as a software? You're like, okay, I see you're being clever there, but like, what do you mean exactly, right? Well, the void is that people don't want to navigate these softwares and the integration and the combination and bringing them to life on their own. And if they hire somebody in-house to do that, they're going to have to pay them a full-time salary. So insert MyCore. So each of our clients are assigned a single point of contact. We call it their people advisor. And they are their guide, their Sherpa, to bring these things to life. And sometimes it's a la carte, as I like to say. They find their gateway drug to MyCore, and they might be like, I need payroll, and mine's a pain, and I've been trying to do it on my own. And then we find that they go and just add from there, and want that experience more and more. So those companies like Gusto, they're a big partner of ours, and really we solve a huge need for them because they can't handle the burden of the service. And when you call, you get put on a 1-800 number, you put a ticket in, and you get essentially sent back something that you could have Googled or looked up in their library. So yeah, that's kind of the core of the value proposition.
Yeah, in breaking down the last 2 years, you said you really started to break some walls down. We talked the other day, and you said you had 11 employees in February of 2022, and you now have over 50, correct, with a full-time CFO, somewhere around that ballpark. And we're talking a lot about people, leading with who, but, it's not just the Nathan Bourne show. So tell us a little bit about what you look for. Not just clearly I think we could skip the part about your leadership style because we can see that clearly today, but when you're recruiting, what do you think has been very valuable for the employees that have come to work with you, and maybe some advice for people of how they can be more approachable for business owners?
Yeah, I think this is always true, but I think it's becoming more and more obvious, and people are becoming more and more aware of it. And I think just generally, like, technology has made jobs easier to do at the what level, like what the job entails and how to do it. So if you're like banking on the fact that you have a background or an education or a resume or even a skill set, you're looking to get killed, because employers recognize that they can teach people. They can train them, they can develop them, they can put them on tutorials, learning management systems, they can teach the what's in the house. What you can't teach are the who's and the whys, right? And this is how I learned it. You can't teach heart, right? You can teach somebody to throw a ball or to jump, but you can't teach heart. That's something that people either have or don't have. You can cultivate it, that would be depressing if you couldn't ignite it. But to answer your question, I look for, and we look for, I have a chief recruitment officer, and his name's Ken. He's the man. He's 76 years old. He's an absolute boss.
Gotta have a good eye.
He's the man.
That's a lot of wisdom in one man.
Right. I don't know if you guys are Game of Thrones fans, but we call him Lord Commander.
This guy.
There you go.
He
Okay.
probably knows. I've never watched it.
Yeah, he's our Lord Commander, man. He protects the wall. So it's a complete inverse where I think most companies, and I learned this from Penn, it was so selective, right? It was like insanely difficult to get into that school. So by the time you got there, you were proud of it. You carried it with, weight, and were like, yeah, like I made it. So we have this sort of gauntlet that people have to come through to get hired. And I think it's easy to think like, yeah, Apple's like that or Google's like that. I'm just a local business, we're over on the corner. We're an HVAC company. Well, which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Do the thing and you'll have the power. So act as if you're the thing that you intend to be, right? And start putting systems and processes and people in place. So I, from day one, was like, it's going to be very difficult to be hired at MyCore. And we put a system together where Ken, and it's really awesome. We have a website. It says Conversation with Ken, and it's his Calendly. So when a candidate is identified, we say, book on this Calendly. And not that we're coy or dismissive, but the entire time we're saying, you'd be lucky, you'd be lucky to work here. And we mean it because we believe in ourselves. We believe in our values. So Ken talks to him for an hour, and he has this trash can because he prints off resumes. Everything's digital, and he just cans them, and he's like, look at all. So he'll just show constantly the people that he's rejecting. And we say, look, bless their hearts. They're good people. We wish them well. We're not, trying to be elitist or anything, but we're looking for people that align with who we are. So right out of the gate, these are our values. This is our mission. And the part of your resume that says what you've done in the past, we literally don't look at it. We're just like, I don't care. It doesn't matter, because if you don't have these values, I won't, even the way you do these things it'll be off. It'll be misaligned. It's like if you're driving and your car needs an alignment, you can just kind of feel it. So I think that's where the momentum has come from, is that we have this alignment, these kind of core values. And maybe not everybody experiences them the same way, as I'm a Christian, so as walk by faith is a very biblical specific reference. So it's not like Chick-fil-A, we're not open on Sunday, but the point is more like, can you get with these values, and do you have capacity for them? And then our leaders develop because we've created the environment for them to develop.
And I'm curious too with Ken, so I guess part of it is just him asking questions, because obviously in a lot of times interview, they're going to tell you the answers that you want to hear to get past that phase. So any, I guess, advice in terms of how to ask questions in a way so that you can kind of get past that initial response?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, have you ever been to, it could be like a pitch or something, or a performance or theater, and you can tell if they're just reciting lines versus if they're like thinking. I think Ken, I can't speak for him, he's masterful, but I think he can discern forethought. Like, has this person put thought into this aspect of themselves before this moment? Right? Yeah. So like he'll ask a key question, or he'll lean in on something. And it's interesting because now we do this in Zoom, right? So they're not coming into our office and being polite and shaking our hand and getting some coffee. They're in their home in a lot of cases, right? So Ken is looking in their background. And it's like, you're too young for this, but remember Room Raiders? Just shut up for a second. Hey, remember the show Room Raiders?
Vaguely, yes.
They would it was an MTV show, right? So MTV was music television.
I know. Come on now. I'm not that young. I know what you're talking about there.
You know who 50 Cent is?
Rob Dyrdek.
Okay, yeah.
Here we go. I'm up to speed.
So it was like a dating show, right? And they would go into their room unannounced. And it was like gross. They bring up black light and find out like stains and all this kind of stuff. But they would just like go through their crap, and then they would decide, like, do you want to date this person? Their room is a mess, or they find like weird stuff and whatever. The point is that in a way he's sort of room rating, because he'll be like, oh, what's that there? Is that a book there? Or like, and he's doing it, one, to find connection. It's not like creepy, but I've had some feedback from the candidates that have come through it, and I don't think they're being polite, because they meet with multiple people, and we'll ask them, at the end. And the way that we even offer the job is we ask them, we believe that you're the right fit for MyCore. Is MyCore the right fit for you? So it's very respectful. It's this two-way street, and saying we're entering this sort of social contract and actual contract together. So it's really about discerning if they just prepared for that one interview to be nice and shiny, or if they're actually on a journey and path of growth. And I think you can tell pretty quickly with people if they're putting the time in outside of that moment.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and break down to the lead with who. Like we've talked a lot about, and I want to just take a few minutes to dive deeper into that, because everyone talks about like what's your why and why you do what you do. But when you explained it to me, man, it really hit home. Like cool. Of whether you like you said, there's 100% find a why. You need a why. That's not what I'm saying. But we lead with who. So break into that a little bit more. Kind of another leg to your life, your existence, your business.
Yeah.
Tell us more about the lead with who mentality and kind of where you're going with that.
Yeah, very cool, man. So it first started as a way, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I ended up at this point in life, like about 30 years old, right? That's a few years ago. And I wanted to find a way to sort of illustrate and articulate like how I rolled, right? And I think that word is fun to play with too, because you have to consider like how you roll, R-O-L-L, and how you roll, R-O-L-E, right? Like how do I roll within my role? Mm-hmm. So the other thing kind of goes back to the world we're living in, right? Like a lot of companies, especially these young, cool kids, tech companies, right? They're trying to eliminate titles entirely. And it's like a nice notion that, okay, you know, there's no hierarchy and we're all in this together. But that's not biologically sound. Like we are hierarchical beings, not based on power and ivory towers, but based on leaders that are willing to protect us. Like our parents are supposed to protect us. We are supposed to protect and provide for our children until they come of age. So that's like hardwired into who we are, right? So I think that if we bust that all up and we dilute that and we water that down, we're looking to get killed, you know, in the next whatever. And that could mean our democracy. That can mean, you know, our belief systems. I mean, there's like a lot that could go wrong, like, you know, maybe a global pandemic or something. So yeah, that's just an example. But all like that aside, if you just look at the word why, and if I were to say take a whiteboard and write the word why up, and I asked you both to give me words that were synonyms of why, but that had a negative connotation to them. You might come up with words like motive or ulterior motive or agenda. And if I asked you to give me synonyms with a positive connotation, you might come up with words like purpose or mission. So the challenge is that we've taken these words and we've separated them. We've said a person with an agenda or an ulterior motive is bad, but a person that's purpose-driven or on a mission is good. But perhaps that's just antics of the English language. There's nothing more uncomfortable than being around a person that has an agenda or an ulterior motive. But that person also could be on a mission or be driven. But a person that genuinely wants to just exist with you first. It doesn't mean we're not going to embark together. It doesn't mean we're going nowhere and we're just holding hands and singing Kumbaya, right? Like you can tell if that person's on the move. But you can sense something in your core just knows, like, does this person want something? Are they asking for something? Do they expect something? And it's a miserable experience because it's different when you're leading with who and you're going, I believe that God has already ordained my next steps. And if you're part of those, awesome, let's do this. If not, it's nice to meet you, man. You know, great job on that pitch. So I think that leadership is really more about discernment and discretion than it is about like action, right? I mean, when you're not lower level, but earlier stage, you're just trying to put it together, right? You're just trying to make it happen. You're duct taping it, you know, you're Frankensteining it together. But as you really become a sophisticated leader and you have people that are moving the gears of your business, all you're doing is, as the CEO, I'm the chief energy officer. I'm managing the energy of the organization at all times, right? And making sure that I don't dial it up too early on in the quarter, you know, too early on in the meeting, because it'll blow people out of the water. So leading with who is this radical shift to say, all right, I understand that there has to be a purpose and a why. And I get that what we're going to do and how we're going to do it and when we're going to do it and where we're going to do it, like that all matters. But if it's not anchored in this who space, I think you're just looking to get killed because it's a finite game that you're playing and it will exhaust. Mm-hmm. Whereas bringing people together at this core level and saying, hey guys, I don't care what industry we're in. Like you guys are cousins. Like that's not going to change, right? Like if grit.org takes it to the moon, or if it's something that you look back on and go, man, that was a great season. the relationship doesn't end. So why don't we build our businesses this way? Why aren't we building communities this way? Why aren't we like living this way? And it's odd because when you come from that place, the other party leans into it more. They're like, damn, you didn't ask me to do anything. Like, I'm going to do more than you didn't even ask. And you get all kinds of like engagement and input and personal responsibility. And it's remarkable what we've been able to create on an absolute shoestring budget just based on conjuring up the human spirit. So yeah, I know that's a lot, but
yeah. No, I love that. There's a couple things that I wanted to mention because, with your SaaS company,
right.
What's unique about it is, like you said, that so many technology companies, they kind of take the person-to-person interaction out, but innately that's what we strive for, and that's a huge part of kind of our purpose as well, of like these young kids, get them connected to each other and build relationships and create a pathway. So I really love the fact that the personal connection is always going to be there, and the fact that you kind of have two really means a lot. The other thing too, I love what you said about the CEO, because I think so many times people think that once you get to be successful, you have a lot of things on your plate. It's all about time management, right? And how many things you can do at a time and being efficient, hiring people to do that. But in my opinion, it's really about energy management, right? It's about you not just being there, but being fully present and being dialed in, prepared, knowing what you're supposed to do. And so I really wanted to kind of segue to my personal question that I wanted to ask you here, because obviously we've heard everything about your upbringing, college, business, but I also know you have a family, married with kids. I'm married for 17 years, 3 boys, entrepreneur as well. So tell me kind of your mindset as a husband, a father, a parent, and then where you prioritize your time, and then what are some of the things that you really want to instill in your kids at this age, at a young age?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting, right? We learn from our family of origin, and then we create our family of creation, and we try to bring into that the good stuff and keep out the bad stuff. A lot of the bad stuff creeps in. So there's things that were in my childhood that have shaped who I am, that I want to be part of my children's character and my children's identity. And I struggle with that because the environment, the sort of the elements, the tough elements formed a lot of that. And
Dad's an entrepreneur now, so
right. Yeah. It's like, and we live pretty well, we're not balling, but like on a budget, we're balling on a budget. Yeah. So, okay, this is a quick little aside. So we grew up the way we grew up, as I already mentioned, right? And cereal, like we ate oatmeal and grits, like talk about grit, like grits, right? Great grits. And if we only got cereal on our birthdays, so we had our birthdays. I grew up thinking that you only got cereal on your birthday, right? And mine was like Lucky Charms, I think, or Cinnamon Toast Crunch. That was mine. So we have a group text with all my siblings, and we move into this new place, and it's got a walk-in pantry, and my wife, she comes from a different upbringing. Let's just say I met her at the country club, not the trailer park, right? And we've got like a row of, there's like 15 boxes of cereal, right? And I just had this, and I've seen it a million times, but I just looked at it like, damn, man, you made it. So I take a picture of it and I send it into the group text, and I was like, to my siblings, I was like, this is how I know I made it. And they just started dying laughing. They're like, oh man. So it's like, I want to instill some of that grit, some of that tough love and but like, how do I do that? Right. So that's where I think those values, those core values are crucial. So it's no secret to my children where they come from. And they're this really cool hybrid of Jen and her demeanor, Jen, my wife, and her, is that
That's
your
my wife's name too. Yeah, funny enough. Yeah.
Do you guys know each other? Right on. So she's poised and steady Eddie, she's the secret sauce, right? Like she's just boom, even keeled. And I'm radical, right? And an entrepreneur and all the things. So my children have much more of her demeanor, but that like beast is within them, right? And it comes out, and I'm like, oh, that's Bourne. We got to put that in check. So it's interesting. I have a 15-year-old stepson from Jen's first marriage, and then we together have 4 children. Gavin is 15, and then Amelia, Rosie, Judah, and Levi is soon to be 8 months. So it'll be interesting to see them. I can tell already that they're gifted, and they're kind of doing some cool things in school and have some natural capabilities. But I'm thankful for the hybrid that they're becoming between Jen and I. And some of them, they always are busting on me and giving me flack for whatever, just, whatever it may be. But yeah, like these core values, I make sure that they're part of our lives. So we talk about faith, we go to church, but we keep it real too. We're in the fight of life, and we don't shelter them from things. There's probably times where we get in an argument and we're like, we probably shouldn't be talking about this in front of them, but I want them to be in community with us. And I'll say this final thought on that. See the shield here? It has the cross in it, and as a Christian, the cross has great significance. But I wanted it to mean something more living and breathing. So I kind of look at the cross as I believe it to be designed to be, which is our vertical selves and our horizontal selves. So we all stood up on our own 2 feet this morning, and we looked up, and there's all that's been poured into us. Our Creator, our parents, our ethnicity, this cup. And then we have those downstream of us, like our children and our employees and our mentees and these damn Gen Zs. So we have to pour out into those people something better than we were given. And we also have our horizontal relationships, the people around us, our peers, our partners. This very moment, we're sitting here eye to eye, right, and locking arms. So I kind of look at everything through that, and it allows me in each moment to be different so that I'm at least aware of it. So like if I have to discipline my children, I'm like, oh, it's time to be vertical, right? It's time to be parental. But then I know I have to balance that with like getting down on the floor and being eye to eye or playing a board game. So I think that's a nice, guide, if you will, to parenting and to leadership, is to be like, when am I being horizontal with people, and when is it time to be the boss and make decisions, and as the father, as the husband, as the leader, say, we're going to Olive Garden tonight. I know it's been a big fight, but we're going to Olive Garden. So that's that.
Yeah, I didn't know if you wanted to say anything. I don't no kids, no experience in that regard, but I can say I grew up with a single mother, and what I really appreciate that you said is leading at their level, like a community, because sometimes I think that with parents, they want to hide a bunch of things, they want to teach you, but it's so much more like if you just introduce the conversation at levels, of course, just make them aware of these various things, then you can have conversations about it. And I was very independent. I was not, if my mom was here right now, she'd be like, oof, my 4 kids, this one right here, he was a tough one. And when I started breaking down those walls, getting in trouble, doing things I shouldn't be doing, and breaking down the conversation of things that she didn't know that I might have been doing or whatever it was, became conversational. And like it was so much easier moving forward. And that's what I've always considered, like when I have kids one day, it's like, we're going to have levels to every discussion. Like, of course, when you're 8, 9, 10 years old, we're at level 1. But older and older you get, I'm taking you up a level, and I'm going to make you aware of these things. But
Brian, how many kids?
3 boys.
Oh, fun. That's a blast.
Yeah, they're awesome kids. Yeah. They're a lot of fun. There's one thing that I did want to ask you. I'll have 2 more questions or so, and then we'll wrap up if you got one more as well, Brian. I saw a speech recently that really dives into success versus significance, and kind of the idea of like success is what you create for yourself, significance is what you create for others, and you can find success and significance, but it's not quite the other way around. So I just want to get your take on that conversation, kind of how you would break down that idea of success versus significance and how they compare or conjoin.
For sure. I think success is finite, and we're made in God's image, so we're eternal beings at the same time that we're finite beings with a very real expiration date, right? So it's this interesting tension between just being a dude that was born on the day we were born and going to die the day we die, and it's not going to say like, here lies Nathan, he had so much money, or like,
he was so rich and the Lamborghini is still in his garage.
Right. So like you hear that early on, like you can't take it with you, and it's true, right? But it doesn't mean that while we're here, right? The Bible says live in the world, but not of the world. So while we're here for however long, like, yeah, kick butt, take names, like drive a nice car, drive a Range Rover, or what is it in Step Brothers, right? Get ass and drive a Range Rover. Yeah. It's like, I'm ready for the Catalina wines, right? So there's like, you can't fully deny that as a human being, particularly a high achiever, any human being, that success matters. It doesn't matter necessarily in bank account and an accolade and in recognition, but it matters in the way that you keep your home orderly. It matters in the way that you dress. Like my wife is radically successful, but she doesn't care at all about the things that I pursue. I mean, we really don't have anything in common in that way. She's like, I don't care that you went to an Ivy League school, and I'm like, I know you don't care. That's why I married you, but I got to play the part. It's part of the brand, it's part of the deal. So it's not, I think, about like denying success and like avoiding it or rejecting it to find significance. It's a lot like success and failure. See, I think what people realize is that if I avoid failure, I can find success. But success is on the other end of failure. You go through failure to find success, and you go through success to find significance.
Bomb drop.
Right? So it's stair stepping. It's not like, oh, success doesn't matter. I'm aiming for significance. Bullshit. Significance is on the other side of success. Because were you a successful parent? Because you judge a fruit by its tree, or a tree by its fruit. So you can have all the doctrine, all the verses, all the quotes, but what's your fruit? What are you bearing in your life? Where are your relationships? What's your health? Where's your bank account? Where's the people around you? Where's your business? Where's the investors? Where the thing? And there's going to be a time lapse. That's called faith. That's the gap that you're walking by faith going, oh, none of it's tangibly here, but I really feel that I was told to do this and be this and walk this out. And that's faith. That's the grind, the muscle of faith that you have to build. So to answer the question, if I answered it, it's really about like realizing that success is finite, but that doesn't mean that you reject it or avoid it. You still are. I'm finite. You're finite. Brian's finite. We're going to just sit here and be like, well, we're just looking for significance, No, we're going to kick ass while we're here, and then our significance is going to outlive us, right? And I think that's what people don't realize too. Is it's like they say, leave a legacy, right? And it's this notion that there's the date of birth, this dash, and then a date of death, and then your legacy begins. And some people have gotten clever, just like they've gotten clever with the why and said, oh, it's your dash. You got to live your dash. And that's all good. It's good stuff. But your legacy begins on your date of birth because you're living your legacy right now. Like if you're an angry dude, your kids are going to have that in them. Now, not like, oh, dad just died? All right, I'm going to get angry now. No, like Dad's angry today, right now. If you are forgiving, if you're loving, if you're patient, if you're kind, if you embody the fruits of the Spirit, that legacy is living currently. So I don't mean to be contrary, but I think it's not so much about saying, oh, success doesn't matter. It's all about significance. I think it's both.
Mm. Well, I had to squeeze that last one in there because, I mean, I'll say coming into this year, I had 2 goals, to create more significance and kind of personal success, make more money. Because, I'm going to the gym every day, I'm reading, right. I'm doing all the right things. I actually want to spend less time in the gym this year than I did in the past. But it was make more money to be able to do more things and within the business, within everything. But the second one was I want to spend some more time around young entrepreneurs. Me and Brian, we spent a ton of time together. He's somewhat young. We get a ton of time together, and I'm very appreciative of that all the time. But, of course, like other young entrepreneurs, to spend time around them too. Like, again, what's good for me can then pour back into what we're doing. And I really was just so happy to be able to meet you, create this relationship, man. Like my walk of faith has been interesting, but my grandfather was a very big believer. I believe that he's still living in his afterlife now. And, that's made me think, but for sure, just it's been really cool to have you here. And I believe like you've been a godsend for me and to be on this podcast, the people that are going to listen, because everything you're saying aligns with what Brian's instilled in me. And then now to hear it from you two, kind of 20, 30s, 40s. I mean, anyone out there listening to this podcast, I don't care if they were 80 or 12 years old, could take something from it. So I'm just really stoked that we've been able to get together, man.
Yeah, man.
Have you on here. It's going to be a very positive, long relationship. But I just got one more question for you. We've kind of dabbled in the Grit Creed a little bit so far. We ask all of our guests this. What part of the Grit Creed resonates most with you and why?
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier, but I think that opening line and looking at it, kind of putting in parentheses the prefix on, I'm somebody going to be what I am now becoming, or I am someday going to be what I am now becoming. Like if I just zoom in on that, that's the story of my life, right? Because I was not dealt the cards that I've created my life from. But what I think happens sometimes is that people that are born a certain way or dealt a certain cards, they build a house of cards. Mm. And there's a way to build it for real, to build it foundationally and to build it at the core. You're going to probably have to work harder because there's certain mechanisms and faculties and relationships and connections and like literal neural pathways, right? Like the actual thinking that your environment has created for you. There's a reason the rich stay rich and the poor stay poor, right? And the rich get richer and the poor get poorer because there's a groove in their thinking. So I think
compounding of habits and
right, and then
discipline.
It's a death spiral or it's a hockey stick growth, And if the kids that are in your world and are at these camps and are just subscribing or even listening right now, if they didn't read on, they just read that first part and they really leaned into it, it'll serve them because it's going to inform everything after that creed, everything after their life, right? It's that the power of that I am statement, but it's also I am not. And I can't speak for everyone. I can only speak from where I come from, but as I mentioned earlier, and that's why I chose the flag, right? So the flag, it's right here. This is, look at that, yeah. Mm-hmm. This flag is a kind of stylized version of the signal flag for the letter N or November, like Alpha Bravo Charlie, and it stands for no. And I loved that because I thought there's a lot of things that I said no to. And everything you say yes to, you're also saying no to, right? So if you say yes to this appointment, you're saying no to something else you'd be doing, right? That opportunity cost. So I would just say that it's this belief that you are becoming, as in you're building, you're constructing, and you're unbecoming, you're unraveling, you're letting go of, you're letting fall off of you something that's not of your making. And if you can hold that dominant thought and really envision who is Colby Harris at 30 years old, and that's your dominant belief, you've got a decade to build and unbuild that person. And just don't make it singular is probably the biggest thing I would say, right? Because if you want to go somewhere fast, go alone, right? If you want to go far, go together. I think that applies to something that's singular and something that's dimensional. So like if you just want to be like a jack dude with great hair, Shaq, you're already there, just add some more muscle and, you'll gray a little bit, But if you're saying, I want to be somebody that's like dimensional, that has 3D to me, 4K, I'm somebody that has faith, I have family, I have finance, I have everything from that. Well, you're going to have to go slow. And most people are not willing to do that because they've had their food delivered to them immediately through a drive-through. This doesn't even happen anymore, but the video would buffer and you're like, I don't want to watch it. The TikTok's 37 seconds, I'm over it. It's like, dear God, like has our attention span compressed that much? And that is lethal. That is dangerous to the human species. If leaders like you don't come along and say, hey, guys, it's okay, we're in our 20s. We're just trying to figure this thing out. So it's weird because you're going to have this complete sense of urgency at the same time that you're the most patient person ever. And it's that tension between the two. We're like, I got to get done now, and it'll probably take 10 years.
I'll have to send you a blog I just wrote called The Power of Patience, because after meeting you, I wrote it. Meeting you and a number of other people. I had a meeting. We had a podcast with a former NFL player, sat down with an Olympian that morning, sat down with you that day, and then I got coffee at night with an entrepreneur from Dubai that was visiting Jacksonville. Wow. And just driving home, we came into this with the mindset of diligence, consistency, creativity.
Cool.
That was the game plan. We're going to make sure we're setting things up. We show up every week, and we're going to get creative from old school, new age, build the best thing ever. And what he's all taught me, and now I can help pour it into people. But I added one more, and that was the patience side of it.
Nice.
Because the relationships, that's what it's based on, and you can't rush that. Like, you could introduce yourself to somebody, and it's 6 months later before you hear from them, and then it's 6 more months before you guys go to dinner. Oh, and then 3 months later you go on vacation together. And then 2-3 years down the road, you guys end up building $1 billion empire together. Right. So, I really appreciate you being here today. I appreciate all the kind comments, all the value you've really added today. Correct me if I'm wrong, but people can find Nathan at Nathan Bourne, at Lead With Who, and then MyCore.io if you're interested in his services. Checks all the boxes there.
Yep.
Other than that, thank you all for listening. Nathan, thank you so much. Can't wait to just continue to see you grow, be along for the ride, do some masterminding, see where it takes us. But that's a wrap for today here at the Grit.org podcast. Please check out our other episodes. Leave us a comment. Tell us something you enjoyed about Nathan's story. Share it with someone you think it would resonate with or impact. As always, we appreciate you tuning in for another episode of the Grit.org podcast.